1,000 words. Look closely because this one is definitely. All right. This first off, I'm going to start off that history is kind of a weird thing. The first thing we have to understand is history is always written by the winners. Now, you're going to see some weird things in here that you're probably not used to. That German looks very, very dark, doesn't he? That's kind of strange. Uh, some of these guys, I think most of them were Jewish, but they're Nazis. That guy's clearly an African German. I mean, but he's, and the guys in the second row, second to the right, he's African too. Hey, wait, that guy looks Japanese, but he's in a Nazi uniform. What? There's something wrong here. Oh, in case you didn't know, this is something about selective history that you're gonna. And these guys are all Middle Eastern, pretty much. Hitler, and here's a German from 1934 or 33. The Olympics. He was German as well. And there's another German African. So you probably picked up what's going on here. A lot of people may have already known this. Maybe some people don't. But when we read history books, particularly here in North America, it really paints a weird picture of that the Nazis were just this Aryan race that cleansed everybody out of their society. But they didn't actually. Now, I'm not sticking up for the Nazis, nor am I condoning anything they done. But I think there's a lot of things that people don't realize, like these Cossacks here. Again, more Muslims, in Nazi uniforms. Hitler, the war that we know now, Hitler was, basically building a huge empire. He was. And again, another Asian. This next one's going to kind of blow your mind. Yeah, now, seeing a black guy in a Nazi uniform is kind of, he's a soldier. But you'd probably say, I never heard about this. This is kind of like forbidden history. Hitler, everybody in North America kind of has the assumption that we went to war in World War II because of the persecution of the Jews. But you have to understand, most people didn't know that, this wasn't known until about 1944 what happened to the Jews. Basically, there was a mosquito bomber that flew over a few of the concentration camps, and the mosquito bomber, which Canada built, tons of them. I don't know if it was 400 or 800 of them we built ourselves. And these were basically the wooden bomber. It was the fastest twin-engine bomber of the war, prop-driven, of course. And it was considered a medium bomber. It was probably one of the most precise. And they also used this thing for reconnaissance. It was a fighter bomber. And they came in over some of these concentration camps, and they knew there were people in there, but they didn't know who these people were. And then it wasn't until after D-Day in 1944 when the full effects of what the Nazi concentration camps were. So the people, right there, it tells you that the people had no clue, even though the intelligence that gathered intelligence from these mosquito bombers, saying, okay, yeah, they got people there, but we lacked the precision guided weapons, so to speak, to do anything about it. Like they couldn't, do a jailbreak, so to speak. After they said it would have been more humane just to bomb these people into oblivion and put them out of their misery, so to speak. But so this idea that when we read in the history books that we went there because of Hitler's oppression of the Jews, well, again, that wasn't known until 1944. That's a little spin doctor there. And again, I'm not, sticking up for Hitler at all, But again, these guys here, these are all Jewish and half Jewish officers. Yeah, and then of course Ireland, for example. I'm part Irish, and I know all about this. They hated the British so much that they actually, opened their ports to the Nazis. But there was several countries. India, for example, they had it was like an Arab defense league, so to speak, that Hitler worked with, and there were several of them. Basically, Hitler had a huge foreign army. Obviously, with Japan, Hitler was allies with Japan, so Japan got some of the German equipment as well. And then, of course, with the Italians, you had Mussolini. Now, again, in all these countries, there was, a lot of civilian resistance as well. Again, some people out there, they deny the Holocaust. Some people say, no, it's worse than what they said it was. To me, I think they're arguing over the semantics of what the numbers were. Was it 1 million? Was it 100,000? Was it 6 million? Nobody really knows. But, my take on it is one is too many. Genocide is wrong, period. There's no further discussion that goes for me. In my eyes, genocide is wrong. Doesn't matter who does it. Here's an African American or an African German kid with a swastika. Part of the Hitler Youth. Again, so like Hitler basically didn't treat Africans as they didn't treat them as equals. I mean, there was racism in that sense, but they didn't cleanse them out like they did. They did some, of course. Here's, I think, the Lithuanian, uh, not Prince, George Soros. Here's a guy who basically collected. Him being a Jew as well, collected other people's property with the Nazis, basically with the SS. The thing is that a lot of people also don't know about this, about forbidden history, is that over 15,000, or what they know of, 15,000 Jews served in Hitler's army. They were either considered half breeds, half German, half Jewish. They were also there were some that served as they basically hid their they hid their religion. Somehow they were able to hide their the fact that they were Jews, and then they, out of fear, served in the army. But then again, you don't know the whole story. To me, what I say is history is very complex, and that we don't know the whole story. And again, history always being written by the winners, usually a lot of stuff like this gets omitted. Again, we have to, paint the picture that this was the worst guy ever, and he was, but that we went to war because of this, that, or the other thing. But there's a lot of details that get lost in history books. But somehow, sometimes these things just seem to pop up. I mean, anybody. I mean, here, look, you have black children doing a Nazi salute. That just looks so odd, you know. Now, the thing is that the whole point of this video is to show you that whenever you have any sort of narrative in history, make sure you look into it. I mean, again, when we look at, for example, apparently in France, they didn't persecute as many of the Jews in France. Mind you, they just basically walked into France. A lot of other countries too, Hitler just basically walked into. He was building an empire, and a lot of people just said, well, okay, they got a big military. They already fought the Spanish, pretty much went out. From the Spanish War to the World War II, they pretty much, and these guys were well seasoned. They were very, very, they were a hell of an army. So basically, yeah, nobody wanted to tangle with them, and they basically just subceded their power to Hitler. Lots of countries did. And then there were other countries like Switzerland, for example, stayed neutral, but they, again, there was a lot of countries in Europe that, were kind of, even if they didn't get involved, they were kind of pro-Nazi. They did have a problem with it, and then of course other countries did. Now the thing is if you look at what they're doing with Russia today, pretty much like the economic sanctions and all that stuff, that's kind of what they did in World War II with the Japanese, but they also did stuff like that with Hitler. They started getting sanctions going and stuff like that, and they basically, the war gets flared. You get currency war, trade war, shooting war, and that blueprint never seems to change. Now, the thing about this is that, when England and Germany got into it, in 1939, the Americans weren't in it yet, and they needed a reason to pull the Americans in. Now, lots of deals were made, of course, and stuff like that, and there's so much stuff in history that is lost in history that we will never actually know. And the thing is the only thing we can use history for really is to learn from it so that we don't make these same mistakes again. But you also have to understand history is complex. There are many views, as we see now in Hitler's army, that it was very multicultural. We're talking, not one or two people. We're talking tens of thousands of people that weren't German. You know what I mean? They weren't the pure blood race, so to speak. The master race, so to speak. So if they were the master race, they wouldn't have blacks in there. They wouldn't have had Indians in there. India Indians, not North American Indians. They wouldn't have had, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of things that I think are lost in history that we're never going to know. But through these photographs, sometimes it paints a different story. What was Germany then? Germany was an ideology, like Hitler had ideologies that were very kind of forward thinking in a lot of ways, but also in a lot of ways, he didn't want to progress people too much. He didn't want technology to take over too much because he knew that technology would lead to mass unemployment. And if we look at things that are going on nowadays with, like basically robotic factories and stuff like that, there's some truth to that, the people's car, the Volkswagen, stuff like that. Very, everything had to serve a purpose. It had to be utilitarian in that type of sense. So we had a lot of ideas, and if you look at some of the Nazi super weapons, such as jet-powered, although I believe the jet engine was created in Russia, don't quote me on that, but I believe it was the Germans that got the first interceptor up, which was the uh, a Heinkel. I think it was a Heinkel, but the first operational known was Me-262, I believe. And then, of course, there was jet-powered or rocket-powered interceptors such as the Messerschmitt 163B Comet. And I mean, when you think about that kind of technology, just put things into perspective. That airplane, okay, if you've ever seen what it looks like, I've had the opportunity to sit in two of them when I worked at the National Aviation Museum, and these things are basically made out of beechwood and steel. They had a rocket in it, which had about anywhere from a 6 to 18 minute endurance, depending on, a few things, the speed, whatever. It basically took off and landed on a skid, and the thing can climb. This is like in 1942, 43. Okay, this thing was capable of climbing 3 miles a minute. There was nothing in the world that could climb that fast until the jet age. Like the mid 50s jet age. 3 miles a minute is still fast to today's standards. Considering a fully loaded CF-18 only climbs 2 miles a minute. So this little 19-foot long rocket interceptor not only could fly that fast, it flew almost 600 miles an hour, plus it also could fly to an altitude of almost 60,000 feet, which is a difficult task for most fighter jets today. So when you think about that kind of forward thinking, maybe not the speed aspect of it, but just the technology for the time, these people were, doing stuff that was, and doing this during the war. Like all this, like had the war started, say, in 1944, with all the advances that the Germans had made up to that point, I'm sure they would have conquered the world. There's no doubt about it. If they had 30,000 Me-262 jet fighters instead of Messerschmitt, 109s, the war would have definitely been different because nothing in the world could compare to it when these things came out. The good news is that they were in, even though they had excellent stuff that was over engineered and worked very well. It was all low numbers. Like there were, half the jets built never got engines. They were lacking critical parts because everything being bombed out. But again, the amount of production, I think we're still able to. Even the Russians, the same thing. The amount of production of stuff that they were able to keep going during the war was incredible. Like tanks, airplanes. When the cities are bombed out, and even still to this day, they find many Nazi bunkers and underground manufacturing facilities. From the making of this video, I think they just found another one somewhere in Germany where they found another underground Nazi bunker, and it had a few vehicles and stuff like that in. So very interesting, and that all that stuff. But again, we still don't really know exactly what the actual you know, reason for the war was. The only thing I could really put it down to, again, because there's a lot of propaganda and spin doctors on there. Some things have, been proven to be true. Some things have been proven not to be true. For example, yes, concentration camps, more and well proved, existed. I know there's some Holocaust deniers out there, and usually the argument isn't that the Holocaust didn't happen. They usually just say, well, the numbers weren't 6 million, whatever. So whether it was 6 million, whether it was 1 million, to me that's semantics. That doesn't really matter. Was it 5 million and 900,000, 99, that type of thing? Okay, so technically it wasn't 6 million, whatever. To me, a genocide happened. A genocide happened, right? Now the other thing is that to me, I'm thinking it's because of the empire building. They went into this country, they went into that country, and they walked in. They didn't necessarily conquer each country. They conquered some, but resistance was kind of futile, and this would have been definitely a threat to the monarchy and several monarchies. Now, if you also look at too from some of the upper echelon Jews that actually served as Nazi SS officers. Yeah, you heard me say that there were Jewish Nazi SS officers. And again, we're talking about if they had at least 15,000 Jews in the regular army. You know what I mean? Nazi sympathizers. Well, you had Nazi sympathizers throughout Europe. You had again, Ireland would come to mind. You had North Africa was full of Nazi sympathizers. Japan was Nazi sympathizers. You know what I mean? They were all over the place. So to me, the idea of it was just a one cut and dry narrative. I think there was a lot more things going on. I think it was more the empire building that scared basically the British. Basically, yeah, when bombers start, the Blitzkrieg was on. Yeah, of course they they fought back against that. And if it wasn't for the English Channel, I'm sure they would have been conquered, because it was what the Americans didn't get in until what, late 41, early 42. Uh, that was a pretty tough. But considering how far the Germans went, that was probably also their main demise, was the fact that they were spread so thin. Um, and like most Canadians here, their grandparents, including mine, my grandfather, just about everybody in this little town at that age, pretty much volunteered for World War II. And my grandfather fought in Sicily and Artona, and he also fought in North Africa. And when you think about that, that's a fair spread right there. I mean, that's a pretty fair spread. Now, to consider going from one end to the other, you're talking pretty much from Russia all the way down to North Africa. That's huge. That's a huge amount to spread out an army. And again, how they, it took 16 nations to stop, but you have to understand, to stop the Germans, but it was also too, they had a lot of nations working for them as well, just not as well armed, so I think it's interesting to see that, even with the Hitler Youth, you had, everybody was basically becoming single-minded in that type of thing in the Third Reich Nazi propaganda, but the idea that it did include other races and stuff like that. There were some people obviously have stories of the violence and stuff like that. That did happen. Again, there's some things that you'll find. Like some Nazi pictures of Nazis like slaughtering people with smiles on their face, but then you find out that they were photoshopped after and stuff like that. And then other things such as like the Nazis making lampshades and gloves out of Jew skin. I don't know if that really. I think that one's been disproved. But again, if you look at people like Joseph Mengele, and all the really horrible experiments he did on people, that type of thing, that stuff did exist. It was pure evil, right? And now I'm not saying German people are evil to this day. Again, they know the power of this thing, but the point is that there's a big story there. That there's a lot of parts of history that people either just don't want to talk about because it puts a gray area into the black and white paradigm. You know what I mean? Like where it has to be all this, or they have to be all one thing. So to me, it's like things are complex. And I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing. I think the more closer to an honest discussion on it that you can have, the better. Again, the only thing history is really good for is learning from it. The best way to learn from it is if you have all the facts. And so why even bring up a video like this? Well, again, it's just to kind of make you think, when you see things, narratives that governments put out and stuff like that in history books, are they correct? Are they telling us everything? How did Hitler seduce all these other nations to join him? You know what I mean? Like, how did he get these people to fight alongside his cause? Now, this is also kind of like black slave owners in the United States. They never talk about the Jewish slave owners in the United States. They never talk about the Irish slaves in the United States. You know what I mean? So you see how things get manipulated very easily. And what it really shows you is that at the end of the day, anybody's capable of anything, and there's no really one good guy, one bad guy in all this. It really does show you that, it was very complex. A lot of people followed along for a lot of different reasons. Why would a North African be going along with Hitler? That type of thing. That doesn't make sense. But when you understand it as the bigger picture and you look into it, then you start saying, okay, well, these guys were fighting those guys and Hitler backed those guys, so they would back him. That type of thing. And it's very interesting to see where all this kind of leads to. But again, when you see these pictures, it just kind of changes the whole what you think And again, it was something that I was kind of aware of, but I never really paid attention to it. Because I mean, you see all these pictures with all these black African soldiers and stuff. And there's not a lot of pictures out there, but I'm sure there's a lot that's being suppressed as well. And also too, again, it just makes you think about history in different ways. It's just one of those things that also too, how do you present it to the public? How do you say, hey, have a look at this. What do you think of it? What does it mean? That type of thing. And some of the stuff, because it is so sensitive, it never sees the light of day in the mainstream media. This is one thing I love about the internet, is that until they crack down on it and put rules in, so to speak, we'll have freedom of speech. But till that time, exercise your freedom of speech to, learn, teach people real history. The forbidden stuff, the stuff that you're not supposed to see, that you're not supposed to know about, and why is it bad that you know? Like, what evils could come from knowing this. To me, I think there's more evil in not knowing. And again, I'm not, sitting out here saying, "Oh, the Nazis were innocent." Hell no. I'm not even saying anything close to that. But it also does put on, a lot of questions. If you're anything like me, in a curious mind, you're probably saying, again, if this guy was, such a tyrant to the point where everybody was afraid of him. How does he seduce these people to do this? And that was one thing about Hitler, is he was a very seductive speaker. He was a brilliant speaker, kind of like how Obama was a brilliant speaker. Say one thing to another. It's like, again, and am I comparing Obama to Hitler? I have compared Obama to Hitler in mannerisms. Obviously, Hitler's done worse things at this point, but you can see the mannerisms because they're both psychopaths. Number one, that's a lot of people might take offense to that, but it's true. If you listen to Obama, what he says and what he does, understand he was brought up by communists, and Hitler, although socialist, fascist, and very, very nationalist. He, basically, although, and this is the other big thing in history that you hear, is the right wing, Nazis. The Nazis weren't right wing; they were they were closer to communism than anything else. Completely central control. Over every aspect of the economy, of your life. I mean, the Nazis controlled everything. They documented everything. You know, and again, they were on the left. They weren't on the right, and that's often a big. That's one of the problems. Well, like they say in any war, the first casualty is truth. That's one of the things they always try to sell you in the history books, is they were a right wing nationalist party, but there's you can't have right wing and nationalist at the same time. Nationalist is basically collective based. I mean, it's yeah. There's not too many of these tyrants in history that were ever right wing. I don't think I can think of any of them that were actually right wing by the true definition of what a right winger is. So they're all left wing. They're communists. They're dictators. They're authoritarians. You know what I mean? That's what they are. So I guess there's not much more I can say about this. Again, you guys tell me what you think about it, what you know about it. Does that change anything for you on your view on what really went on? I think there's a lot of stuff we just will never understand. Again, like anything, if you don't experience it, you can't understand it. Which I'm kind of okay with that. I wouldn't want to have experienced World War II. That would have been a very nasty, nasty thing. I'm hoping we can use these experiences to learn from, so that we don't get into World War III. But I don't know. In this day and age, who knows what's going to happen? So there we go. That's Hitler's Foreign Army, and yeah, I guess that's about all I can really say about it. So you guys tell me what you guys think about it. So if you like this kind of content, there'll be a link down below to make donations. And thank you very much to everybody who has. Rate, subscribe, share, comment, like. Be true to yourself, be true to others, and always, always do the right thing. Have a great day, eh? G'day, hi, and welcome. If a picture's worth 1,000 words, look closely, because this one is definitely. All right. This first off, I'm going to start off that history is kind of a weird thing. The first thing we have to understand is history is always written by the winners. Now, you're going to see some weird things in here that you're probably not used to. That German looks very, very dark, doesn't he? That's kind of strange. Uh, some of these guys, I think most of them were Jewish. They're Nazis. That guy's clearly an African German. I mean, but he's, and the guys in the second row, second to the right, he's African too. Hey, wait, that guy looks Japanese, but he's in a Nazi uniform. What? There's something wrong here. Oh, in case you didn't know, this is something about selective history that you're gonna. And these guys are all Middle Eastern, pretty much. Hitler, and here's a German from 1934 or 33. The Olympics. He was German as well. Yeah, there's another German African. So you probably picked up what's going on here. A lot of people may have already known this. Maybe some people don't. But when we read history books, particularly here in North America, it really paints a weird picture of that the Nazis were just this Aryan race that cleansed everybody out of their society. But they didn't actually. Now I'm not sticking up for the Nazis, nor am I condoning anything they done. But I think there's a lot of things that people don't realize, like these Cossacks here. Uh, Again, more Muslims, in Nazi uniforms. Hitler, the war that we know now, Hitler was, basically building a huge empire. He was. And again, another Asian. This next one's going to kind of blow your mind. Uh, yeah, now, seeing a black guy in a Nazi uniform is kind of, he's a soldier. He's, but you'd probably say, I never heard about this. This is kind of like forbidden history. Um, Hitler, everybody in North America kind of has the assumption that we went to war in World War II because of the persecution of the Jews. But you have to understand, most people didn't know that this wasn't known until about 1944. What happened to the Jews? Basically, there was a mosquito bomber that flew over a few of the concentration camps, and the mosquito bomber, which Canada built, tons of them. I don't know if it was 400 or 800 of them we built ourselves. And these were basically the wooden bomber. It was the fastest twin-engine bomber of the war, prop-driven, of course. And it was considered a medium bomber. It was probably one of the most precise. And they also used this thing for reconnaissance. It was a fighter bomber. And they came in over some of these concentration camps, and they knew there were people in there, but they didn't know who these people were. And then it wasn't until after D-Day in 1944 when the full effects of what the Nazi concentration camps were. So the people, right there, it tells you that the people had no clue, even though the intelligence that gathered intelligence from these mosquito bombers, saying, okay, yeah, they got people there, but we lacked the precision guided weapons, so to speak, to do anything about it. Like they couldn't, do a jailbreak, so to speak. They, and after they said it would have been more humane just to bomb these people into oblivion and put them out of their misery, so to speak. But so this idea that when we read in the